Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Tony Merkel. He is the host of the Confessionals podcast, where witnesses of the unexplained come forward to share their experiences with the world. Though his pursuit was focused on the phenomenon of Bigfoot, he quickly began connecting dots with other topics such as ghosts, demons, alien abductions, and much more. With his foundational faith in Jesus Christ, he realized he is a little different than the majority of people pursuing these topics and embraces his uniqueness in the paranormal community. Tony, welcome. How are you tonight?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm very good, despite the twilight zone that we're currently living in, just trying to make the best of everything.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for tonight because we get to take people's minds off it for a little while. And my show is all about connecting those dots from UFOs, ETs, and paranormal to the myriad of other unexplained phenomenon that I cover. And I always love new and different perspectives. Tonight, I thought we could start with a little bit more about your background and what led you down your path.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it was, it starts as a childhood fascination. I mean, I grew up out in the middle of nowhere in rural Pennsylvania Dutch land. And, I was a trailer park kid. We lived in a very big trailer park surrounded by a bunch of cornfields. It was out in the middle of nowhere. And so as kids and stuff, we found things to do. And a lot of times we went down the woods and we would do anything from build tree houses that actually connected to each other to, damming up a creek so that we had a swimming pool because that was the poor kid's swimming pool. And so it was just like a lot of time spent in the woods and getting in trouble and all that stuff. But one of the things for me was when I was a kid, I remember borrowing a book from the library. And it had, Bigfoot in it and Loch Ness Monster. And for me, it wasn't even about the information at that time. As a kid, it's just like, wow, look at the pictures, look at that. Is it real? This book's saying it's real. And I kind of just took my imagination and we would start talking about, our werewolves real and all that stuff. And as you get older and stuff, when we were kids, we were so serious about it that we would talk about how we were going to go and hunt the Loch Ness Monster down one day. We were going to prove to the world that it existed. And, it's just one of those things where I think a lot of kids get like that. And then as you get older, other things take its place. I mean, for me, it was basketball and girls a lot. So I just, did my thing and stuff in high school and into college. And then I got married young. Me and my wife, we got married when we were 21. And so I was about 25 years old and I was like coming home from work and bored, and I was just sitting there watching these TV shows of like these, Monster Quest and things like that. And those kind of shows kind of renewed an interest in my mind. And I started taking it serious. I started looking into this stuff. And I shouldn't say I started taking it serious. I started looking into it out of curiosity. And the curiosity led to obsession on certain things. And it all started with Bigfoot, though. I mean, I was like, is this thing real? I mean, I so want this thing to be real. Is it real? And so I started looking into it, and I started I started a Facebook group called Pennsylvania Sasquatch Research, and that was just my like humble attempt to just make a group where I thought if I could find 20 people in Pennsylvania that were into the topic and knew about it, maybe I could learn from them. And that was the whole reason why I started the group. And then it just kind of grew. And as it grew, there was a lot of people asking me questions. And I was just like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. Like, I'm just here trying to learn from you guys. And apparently you're trying to learn from me. And so it became a group where we kind of learned from each other and we started having open dialogue and just, pontificating out loud. And I think that really was the foundation as to where I am today, where I really just pursue open thought. I pursue just thinking out loud, not worrying about, if I'm wrong, right, if I look stupid or what. We just think about stuff and we say things. I say things that, I think, in other circles and stuff, if I were to say, they'd say, what are you, freaking crazy? That's sci-fi. That's, Star Trek or something. But that's just how I pursue my life. I don't think that, I think that the world that we live in is far stranger than any of us can comprehend. And, off that basis, I kind of just move forward. And, you say some things and you think about some things that kind of lead you to a dead end, or at least you think it leads you to a dead end. And sometimes you're like, you kind of go down this little path and you're just like, there's nothing here, but let me just see what's what. And all of a sudden you're just like, boom, you're just like, oh my God, like, are we serious here? Like, so, I mean, that's kind of like, I guess the short way of saying how I got it all going and stuff. It was just, one thing led to another. And here I am with the podcast and interviewing people and all that fun stuff.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I find the deeper I look into this stuff, the less I really know. It gets the rabbit holes get deeper, the phenomenon gets stranger, but it all does have to seem to have some kind of strange connection to each other. I haven't quite figured out what that is, but it's awesome trying to by talking to fascinating and awesome researchers like yourself. Let's start with Bigfoot tonight, where you started.
Okay.
Based on everything you've researched, what is Bigfoot? Is it a primate? Is it some kind of interdimensional creature? Is it an alien? Is it some sort of Neanderthal? What's going on with Bigfoot?
Yeah. Okay. Well, your guess is good as mine, right? So, what I always tell people is I'm not going to tell you that I know stuff. I'm going to tell you what I think, and I hope that people disagree with me, because I don't want to be the guy that's right in the room. I don't want to be that guy. I just want to be the guy who, spawns conversation. And I don't think I got it all together. Let's just put it that way. But if you nailed me down and you said to me, you have to tell me exactly what you think Bigfoot is, as long as it's what I think Bigfoot is, not what Bigfoot is, I would tell you that I think that this is where I lean towards, and kind of like what you said in the beginning with the opening statement of who I am. I do have a theological background, and I kind of build through my worldview through that. And so when it comes to the Bigfoot phenomenon, when I first started looking into it, I was thinking, all right, if this is real, which I wasn't convinced it was real. I was fascinated by the stories. They're entertaining as hell, but is it real? And so I was like, if it's real, it's a monkey. It's some kind of like North American primate that we just, for whatever reason, we can't keep up with. And so then my thought process evolved from there. And I was like, okay, so how many times do we need to hear Bigfoot sightings and people saying they saw these things, but there's no proof of it for us to start thinking there's something else going on here if it's real, right? And it kind of evolved from there, where I started listening to a lot of people's encounter stories. And some people have very simplistic encounter stories where you can say, maybe not, like it's just they're driving down the road and they walked in front of them. It's like, all right, well, if that's what you saw, that's what you saw. I mean, it's not necessarily hard evidence or, anything like that, but it's your sighting. And then there's some other people who have ongoing experiences with Bigfoot, and whether it's, on their property or a one-time experience, but it was dramatic and it was extensive, detailed. And after you start talking to so many people and you put it all together, for me at least, I'm like, well, I think Bigfoot exists. And so from that point of saying to myself, I think Bigfoot exists, okay, now what is it? And that's where I started, doing the whole Bigfoot looking into, and the idea of it being just a monkey in the woods or whatever. But then the more I heard people's stories and the more I heard the paranormal side of Bigfoot, and some people like to call it the woo and all that stuff, but I've heard so many people's experiences where they're talking about, this thing, seeming like it disappeared. And I would ask some people, I would say to them, did it disappear, or did it just move so fast that it looked like it disappeared? Or did it like kind of surround itself with the surroundings and it just kind of blended in? And so you're saying it disappeared just by more of just conversation, but not literally disappear. And there are people who say that that either it disappeared, or they don't know. They're like, they have no idea. They don't know if it moved so fast or what, but it looked like it disappeared. And so you start hearing these different stories and the cloaking Bigfoot. And I started thinking, okay, well, I've heard so many of these stories now. I got to try giving it credit, like try understanding it through those lenses. Is it possible? How is it possible? And as soon as you enter into that realm of can Bigfoot disappear, it all of a sudden is not just a monkey in the woods. Like it's not. It's something else, you know. And so you start thinking, okay, is it alien? You know, you hear these different stories of people saying that UFO sightings are happening right after the Bigfoot sighting, or I forget where I heard it, but somebody said and I don't believe the story. I think this guy was a little bit loose in the head, but just it was a long story, but it had lots of twists and turns, but he did see a Bigfoot being beamed up into a UFO, and I was just like, oh my goodness, you know. But you know, it was still, you know, interesting story at least. But so I started hearing all these different stories, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't think it's Bigfoot's an alien. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a Chewbacca, right? But you know, what I started thinking was, how do I look at this through my own personal worldview theologically? I started seeing in the Facebook group, this is before I had my podcast, I started seeing in the Facebook group how there would be people commenting and stuff and talking about, you know, Bigfoot and this, that, and the other. And they would say, this was a common thing that I would hear people say going on in my Facebook group was, when they go into the woods, it's a spiritual experience for them. And for me, I was like, wow, spiritual experience, that kind of puts it in a whole other atmosphere for me. And and looking at it through my eyes, I would go into the woods. I would hike around. I wouldn't call what I did research. I wasn't going out there with a magnifying glass and, you know, all that stuff. I was just going out there with, you know, my hiking bag, and I would hike around off trail because I was like, just put myself in the environment, see what happens. But I never felt like it was a spiritual experience. And then, so I started really just thinking about it. I'm like, am I dealing with something that's, you know, people are talking about this thing disappearing, and, you know, people are talking about it being a spiritual experience. Am I dealing with something that's more demonic here? And if I'm dealing with something more demonic, should I be so invested in it like I am right now because of, you know, my own personal beliefs? And I just started thinking about that. And then it hit me. I started listening to, I forget who I was listening to, but somebody mentioned extra canonical books in the Bible, books that were excluded from the Bible, that were once in the Bible. And the book of Enoch came across my radar, and I started looking at it, and I wasn't sure exactly what the book of Enoch was at first. And I knew that there was 3 books of Enoch. And I started looking into that. And then before I even got too deep into that, I found out about the connection of the first book of Enoch with Genesis 6 verse 4, and talking about the Nephilim and the fallen angels. And I started seeing people online relating Bigfoot to Nephilim, and I was looking at just the Bible itself, and I was like, well, it doesn't seem like these Nephilim that are brought on in the Bible are Bigfoot. Like they talk about them being giant men, like Goliath was a Nephilim, offshoot of the Nephilim. He wasn't a first generation, but so it was like I didn't see any real evidence of Sasquatch coming from that. And then that's when I started really kind of looking at the Enoch versus the Genesis. And in Enoch, first Enoch, Enoch himself wrote it. It's wrote it as if like he's writing down what's going on around him right now. And I personally, for me, I think Enoch is one of the oldest pieces of literature we have. And it's extremely old. And in there, he talks about in more detail what happens in Genesis 6 verse 4, where the fallen angels come and have sex with women, offspring, giant Nephilim. And because the way I look at it is the Genesis was written by, or I think it was written by Moses. Not 100% sure on that, but Moses is writing stuff down, and I don't think he thought that it was prudent to go into detail as to what the Nephilim were, because I think in his time, everybody knew what they were. Like everybody around him knew what they were. This was not something that was a hidden secret or forbidden knowledge. It was, something that everybody knew about. But in Enoch, he did go into great detail, and he talks about what happens in Genesis 6 but also other things, and went into a lot more detail. And one of the things that he says, I think it's in like the 7th chapter of Enoch, or maybe it's the 1st chapter, one of the first 7 chapters of Enoch. He talks about how not only did the fallen angels come to earth and do that with humans, but they also did it with animals and plants, and they wanted to disrupt all of God's creation. I think in Enoch it says creation, but in my modern terms, and the way I think of it, is all of God's DNA, all the DNA that God created. And doing it back then, I believed would try, their attempt was to disrupt the bloodline of the future Messiah. But when I started looking at that, I was like, hold on a second. What happens if we have a fallen angel doing that with an animal? And then all of a sudden, the idea of Sasquatch, Dogman, all these cryptid creatures comes flushing into my head. I'm like, holy crap. So maybe this is where they come from. Maybe what we're dealing with now is a remnant of that, because I have been told by several different people that we still deal with giant humanoids in like Afghanistan and such, especially in the I forget what the Providence it's like a nature preserve that borders Afghanistan and China. It's a very small section, but in that section, it has been described that there are giants up there, and that's why the locals don't go up there. And so I started thinking, well, if giants live today, or even if they don't live today, because after the flood, we have proof of these giant human beings, these Nephilim existing. So like in Numbers 13:33, it says that the Nephilim were there, and that's post-flood. So like somehow they've survived this flood in the Bible. And so if they've survived that, maybe they are in some kind of way living today. And then I started thinking, okay, so maybe Sasquatch could live up to this time as well. And then I started thinking, well, how does this work with the idea of these things disappearing? How does this work with the idea of these things doing like glowing eyes and all this other weird stuff? And then I started thinking about the characteristics of angels and what angels are and what they're able to do. And, we know that, like, for instance, Paul in the New Testament said that to always be hospitable, because you never know when you're in the presence of an angel. And, you could say that, maybe you don't know because they're invisible, you don't know they're there. Or maybe you could say because they look like us, because we know that angels can transform their bodies and they're interdimensional. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that whole story, they're thrown into a fire, and all of a sudden the king looks in and he's like, hold on a second, didn't we throw 3 people in there? And they're like, yeah, why? Well, there's 4 in there now. It was an angel protecting them. They walk out of the fire. So they're able to transcend dimensions. But also Lot, he invited them into his home to have dinner with them, and they consumed food with him. They had dinner with him, and they looked so human that the town the townspeople wanted to I think it was basically they wanted to kill him after they had their way with him. And so like to all these townspeople, these angels looked like human beings, like real human beings, and we know that they consumed food like human beings. And so to me, I was like, okay, so we know they can transcend dimensions. We know that they can consume food like human beings. They look like human beings. They, in Genesis 6, verse 4, apparently can have sex like human beings and produce offspring. And so I was like, well, Sasquatch is seeming to be interdimensional, but not all Sasquatch. But we get those reports of Sasquatch being interdimensional. And we get those reports that they disappear right in front of you. And so I started making all these connections, and I was like, maybe these things, and this is where I kind of fall right now, and I'm happy to be wrong, by the way, but the way I fall on now is maybe these things are a remnant of what happened before, and some of the ones that we're dealing with today still have been able to, the DNA or whatever it is has been passed down to them today. So like, for instance, I use this example. I have a twin brother and sister, and I'm Puerto Rican, they're Puerto Rican. And my sister Danielle, she's very not tan. Like, I mean, she'll get tan during the summertime and stuff, but you wouldn't know she's Puerto Rican if you just looked at her. But her twin brother Donnie, he gets darker than me during summertime. I get pretty crispy if I'm outside, and like my brother Donnie just blows it out of the water. So like they're twins, but there's something different in their DNA. And so I started thinking maybe not all Sasquatch have the same ability. Maybe some of these things have certain abilities that others do not because it was passed on from their ancestors. And that's just my, uneducated opinion on things, but that's where I fall. So
No, well, that's a very fascinating opinion. That's the first of its kind that I've personally heard. It's very interesting once you think about it, especially when you have to factor in the interdimensional aspect, because a lot of the reports I also hear, they're disappearing. You can't find them anymore. So it does, it makes you think, and it adds another aspect. And that's why I love having people like yourself on. Have you personally had any Bigfoot encounters or sightings or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I have not. I wish I did, so that I could really, because I mean, I'm the guy that's just gonna cut it to you straight. Like, I haven't seen one. I wish I did. I don't know if I want to have an encounter right now because I have a 2-year-old and one on the way. So, because I don't really trust these things. I've heard enough stories where they can get violent, and I just don't. All right, let's put it this way. 3-4 years ago, let's just say 4 years ago, before my podcast started, before I had any kids, I was suicidal about it. Like, I would go out and I would look for these things every chance I had. I would go off trail, and I was like, if I get a chance to like get as close as possible, I will. And I was like, if I die at the hands of a Bigfoot, at least I die knowing these things existed. Like, I'm good. Like, let's do this. I was like, my wife, she's going to get married to a guy better than I did. She'll do better her second time around, and she'll be smarter this time around. She'll marry a wealthier guy or something. She's good. Like, you don't have to worry about her. But now it's the kids. So it's harder. But, when we were out there, there's a couple of things that would happen that we had happen to us. And one was, a simple one was, so we see that there's these tree structures that people talk about. And when I first started seeing the tree structure idea, I was like, come on, like, Bigfoot's making tree structures. Why? And to this day, I can't say why, but what I can say is that it's not beyond their capability, because these things are clearly smart enough. Like, they're not stupid. And so why, I don't know. But when you come across some of these tree structures that are just absolutely huge, and I came across, my buddy Don, my wife was there, and 2 people who were escorting us were there. The 2 people who were escorting us had a sighting the weekend before. And so we're out here at this place, and we're coming through, and we started seeing like all these down trees, like almost like it was like a spider's web. It was like almost like it was on purpose. And so we're going through this area, and there's a body of water on our left-hand side and very thick brush on the right. And we come up across this area, and all of a sudden we see this TP structure that was absolutely huge. And so the first thing you're looking at when you're doing that is, was this cut? Was this chopped? Is there any signs of that? No. Every single branch, every single tree that made this structure up was not cut. And there were a ton of them. And there was literally trees. I mean, logs like this that were 40, 50 feet up in the air that was literally brought to this location to make up this tree structure. I'm like, well, Boy Scouts didn't do this. Maybe some really buff hunters did it, but little Boy Scouts didn't do this, because Boy Scouts make tree structures. A lot of times people don't realize that, but they're taught how to make tree structures, and they actually mean stuff that I don't even know what they mean, but it's to communicate for people coming up on the trails. And also Native Americans used to do the same thing. Native Americans used to take trees and actually bend them certain ways so they grow in certain directions, and different directions meant certain things. And to this day, like in Pennsylvania, every once in a while you come across one of these trees, and when you come across it, don't even say, oh, Bigfoot made that. It just cheapens it. Like, that is such an old tree that Native Americans that used to wander these grounds made it like that. Like, the one I saw came out of the ground, and it split into 2 like a field goal post, and it came out at an equal distance and shot straight up. And it was just, for me, it was just like, wow. Like I felt like I was standing at history, like somewhere that people don't know exists. And but anyways, this tree structure that I found, it was probably about 12 to 15 feet in diameter. Easily multiple people could go in there. And it was out in the middle of nowhere, very interesting. And then so we found it, we took pictures of it, it was cool, and we kept on hiking. And then probably like 100 yards away from there, I found my first footprint. And I was like, whoa. And I didn't personally find it. I was walking and there's a guy named Andrew in front of us who was escorting us, and he kind of stops and I almost fall on him. And he's like, what is that? And I looked down and it was the ground. It was a path that we were walking on, and the ground was like real dry and hard. And there was a definite impression in the ground of a footprint that was, I think it was probably about 15 inches long. And so like, you got in mind, like, you know, now I'm pushing probably like 215 pounds, but back then I was probably about 185, and I'm standing on the ground trying to make a boot print in the ground. I couldn't make a boot print, but this was so indented that I could put my fingers in the toe prints and feel the indents on the ground. So whatever made it was really heavy. And I was like, man, we got to try casting this. And so my very first cast, we started casting, and it sucked. It was absolutely awful. There wasn't enough water in it. It was just like, I was so proud of it, but nobody else could see anything. And I was like, look at this beauty. And they're like, look at what? It just looks like plaster, you know, but I was proud of it. So we found that, and we went up some more areas, and we actually found a spot that was, I don't know who or what made it. Maybe some hunters made it, but it doesn't really make sense as to why it was made where it was. So like, if hunters were making this, there was some kind of blind that was created, and it was looking out over a trail. So like, if hunters are maybe hunters, I'm not sure, but we definitely found a blind area where it was, again, all trees and sticks and stuff that were broken off and making a blind looking, and it was all padded down behind it. But so that was one experience, but we were going out onto the Appalachian Mountain, and my buddy Don, who I would hike with, he actually saw a Bigfoot out there on Christmas Eve 2015. That's what got him into the topic. So we were up in that area, and we were off trail, probably about a mile or two off trail. We were out there, and we kept on hearing like these rock clacks, and it was just like very deliberate, like rock clapping together. And you know, that's another thing that people say Bigfoot does. And I don't know why, but hey, that's what people say. And that's what I heard. And so we're stopping and we're filming, and we're taking audio, we're listening, and that's what we're listening for. And I never heard anything else. But then when I got back home and I was looking at the audio and the video of it, I'm listening, and I hear something right after one of the rock clacks. And I was like, what is that? So I had to clean the audio. And when I got it as best as I could, you could hear this whoo. And I never heard it in person. Never. And I asked Don, I said, did you hear anything? He said, no, but it's clearly on the audio. And so I think that like, you could easily say, somebody could easily say, well, see, it's paranormal. It made its way onto your recording. But I think that I was so distracted by the rock clacking and trying to listen for that intently, I wasn't listening for other stuff. And because it wasn't like a very strong whoop, it was off in the distance, but I was able to clean the audio and I could get it. And I was like, wow. But so those are some of my experiences with Bigfoot, but I've never seen one, and I would love to see one, you know, maybe from a safe distance though.
Right. And you briefly mentioned that you've heard accounts of them becoming violent. I've heard a couple accounts in the past, but could you possibly share a couple of those, some of the most profound ones possibly?
Yeah. So, you know, to be honest with you, the one that always sticks out in my mind when I say that is a really well-known one, but I'll tell it, and he won't care if I tell it. He's a good friend of mine. You probably know who he is, Wes Germer from Sasquatch Chronicles. His experience with these things, it's terrifying for me. I know Wes on a very personal level, and he has told me this story at least twice. Upon request, like it's not like something he just goes around telling, but once was on my show, and then another time was in conversation. And Wes and his brother Woody were going through a rough time. Some family members had passed away, and they were just kind of down in their, you know, emotions and stuff. And so one night they decided to go up on the mountains, and they're in Washington State. and kind of just, blow some steam, go for a drive. And they come across a logging road, and Wes didn't want to go down the logging road. It was kind of really bad shape. Woody kind of wanted to put it in 4-wheel drive and give it a shot and see what happens. And they started hearing somebody or something coming up on their car. I think it was probably a Bronco or something. I don't know. But the one on like one side, one on the other, one coming from behind, and they're coming in closer and closer. They both had guns in the car, and they were getting ready for a firefight. And they saw the things. If I remember correctly, they saw the things there. But what really gets me in my head is when they tried getting out of there and they're flying down a road, they come to a stop. And I think Woody was driving. It was just like one of those things where they stopped because they're just like, I need to breathe. Like I can't drive right now until I calm down. And I guess they weren't that far from the original location, and these things came out onto the road, and they could see it, one in the tree. And what sticks out in my head is the one really big one, I guess, is probably the alpha. Would like it strutted across the road, and then it like dropped down on all four, like it was getting ready to be in attack mode, and it was like taunting them. And this went on, I think Wes said, for like a few hours. Like this was a long period of time. If he said it felt like it was maybe probably like 20 minutes or something, but it went on for a long period of time. But in that period of time, these monsters are physically threatening them and like edging them on, like it's going to attack them. I've also heard of stories that this is an old story. I think it probably happened in the 50s. I can't remember exactly when, but a guy was attacked by one of these things, and he actually shot it in the face with his gun. It was his pistol. And then there's one that I had on my show where Brian came on from Gallia County, Ohio. It's right, it borders West Virginia. And he had these experiences where he saw them on the property as a kid. And then he moved away, came back, and he sees them again. And he said that if they didn't bother him, he wasn't going to bother them. And it was just like, live and let live kind of thing. And then one day he is out hunting. And when he's hunting, he's doing, I think he was, if I remember correctly, he was turkey hunting. And he was in full gear, top to bottom. And he's sitting at the base of a tree. And he sees this thing coming in. And Brian says that from his observations, this is at least in Gallia County, Ohio, the red ones seem to be more aggressive than the black ones. So he's seen ones with red hair, and he's also seen one with black hair. And he says the red ones are always the ones that give him a problem. And this one came in towards him. And I feel like this thing like wasn't totally sure what was going on. Like Brian was in complete camo. And I'm not sure if this thing actually knew what Brian was. I think this thing knew Brian was there and didn't know what he was. And so Brian actually was saying like, get out of here kind of thing. And it got it within like, I think he said either 15 feet or 15 yards. And he raised his gun up and he shot it. And he said, for his words, he said, I blew its face off. I blew its head off. And from that point, like he walks over, he sees it, he leaves, and he goes to get his friends. And when they come back, the body's gone, and there was a bunch of these creatures up on the hill making noises. And so I think like a day or so later after that, he actually got a visit from government agencies that actually were questioning him on it. And he said they told him that what he did was a felony because he killed an endangered species. And I said to him, how does that even work if they're an endangered species, but they don't recognize it publicly? And he said, I don't know, but that's what they told me. And so, that story was pretty intense because of, what he went through as far as shooting the thing. And he's seen him since then. I've talked to him since then, and he's seen them. He hasn't shot anything, but he after that experience, he kind of got set down this path of just, he really wanted to prove that these things existed because, what happened was Brian, he's not like a super tech savvy guy. And he was in a Facebook group and he was commenting on somebody's Bigfoot experience or something. And he said something that pissed a lot of people off. And they're like, how do you know? What do you know? This, that, and the other. And he's like, I know because I've seen him. In fact, I've shot him. And when I saw that, I was like, whoa. And so that's when I direct messaged him, and I got his phone number, and I talked to him on the phone for a few times, and then I had him on my show. And Brian had no idea who I was or what we were doing, even when we did the recording. Like, I remember when I called him, he's like, "So is this like going to be on the radio, or are we just talking?" Like, he had no idea. And so, like, what you hear on that episode was just pure Brian. It was just him, just a very raw take of what he experienced. But yeah, it was definitely that probably was one of the more scary experiences that I've heard, because of how close it got. And he said the face, it just looked like that, like it wanted to kill him, and that's why he decided to shoot it. And you know, he says he killed it.
Now, you said the feds told him that it was a some kind of he killed an endangered species. Was there any legal ramifications for him?
That's the funny thing. There wasn't any legal ramifications. They said, if you do it again, we're going to come back and arrest you. If you do it again. And I'm just like, that doesn't make no sense. It doesn't make any sense. And he said that after that experience, though, he said that he could, because I guess he would do, you know, hunting on not the up and up sometimes, you know. and he said after that experience, though, like, they just hawked him. Like, he said there was always some kind of black vehicle going up and down his road, parked down the street, this, that, and the other. So like he was more upset that he couldn't go hunting whenever he wanted to, because they're always watching him. But I think he actually spent some time talking about that. I'm like, we're not here to talk about that, Brian. We could bring it back to Bigfoot. But yeah, he said that they're just always watching his property then after that. So I think that if he was visited by somebody that, you know, was saying that such things, they were lying to him. There's just, I mean, a Bigfoot, if it's endangered and you're yelling at him because he killed him, like, you're not just going to say, okay, but next time it just doesn't seem right.
I'd love to know what these government agencies, if anything, what they know about this Bigfoot phenomenon. That'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
I could spend all night talking about Bigfoot, but I do want to move on to some other things. Let's talk. You mentioned earlier dogmen. Do you think it's a similar type of phenomenon as Bigfoot?
Yeah, you know, with dogman, I hear more experiences from dogman where people say that they felt it was like just pure evil. With Bigfoot, you get a lot of people who, I mean, if they saw a Bigfoot, they'd probably like hold its hand, skip through a forest with it, kind of thing. Like they are just like, there's a lot of people who have an experience with Bigfoot, and they're just these peaceful forest creatures or whatever, forest people. Some people say they are, but with dogman, I've heard one story, and she was actually on my show, and it really caught me off guard. But most people's experiences is that this is just pure evil, and a lot of people describe it as like a demonic feeling. Now, I've had several people on the show talk about at different times about a dog entity showing up in their homes. And one that always comes to my mind is actually one that's not even on my show, but I was just floored by the story. And it's probably because it's the first time I ever heard this, which was a guy and his wife were arguing, and they went to bed angry. They're both laying in bed awake, and they start seeing like these shapes appearing at the bottom of their bed, like I guess in the air, like, you know, just different shapes. And he kind of nudges her, and he's like, "Are you seeing this?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm seeing this." And so they're watching these shapes. And then all of a sudden, he just has this like deep feeling inside of him that he needed to turn his head and look to his left. And he was completely scared. He turns and looks his head to the left, and there's this dog standing in his bedroom staring at him with red eyes. And like things like that. So it's like, is that a dog man, or is that like a demonic entity that he saw? If it is a demonic entity, does that mean that dog man experiences are demonic experiences? I talked to a guy who he was an ex-Satanist, I guess an ex-satanic high priest. And I guess there's different, I don't know much about the Satanism. I should probably learn more about it. But he said that there's different types of Satanism, and there's different routes you can go with Satanism. And one of the routes that he took was that at one point he reached a level where he actually had to make a decision as to whether he was going to become a vampire or a werewolf. And he says that a vampire is not like what you see in the Hollywood. It's more like in practice. He said that you drink people's blood and you practice a lifestyle of a vampire, but it's not like you're, flying through the sky and picking up high school girls, like it's just not how it is. But he did say that the idea of the werewolf, he said that he talked to a guy who went through that process, and the guy told him if he ever reached that level to make that decision, that he should never pick the werewolf because it's the most painful experience you could go through. And then he described how people who go through this, they truly physically transform their bodies. Their bodies transform. And to me, the only way that seems possible is if there is a demonic entity that comes into your body, or maybe multiple demonic entities. Because, we hear about people's experiences with, demon possessed people who their faces literally changed. And in fact, I think it's, it's this coming Thursday show for my members on my website. We have Arlene coming on, and her brother had a dad who just was a mess when they were growing up. And when he would come home, both her and her brother would see their dad, just raging mad or whatever. But one of the things that she says is that his face did not look like his face. Like his face would look like a demonic face, like his face was transformed. And so like when it comes to the idea of the werewolf dog man thing, the only way I think that could be possible is if like there's something from the inside transforming you. And I believe that our bodies we are much more spiritual beings than what we believe and what we give ourselves credit for. I don't think that it's as simple as we're just flesh and blood and that's it. And so to me, it kind of makes sense on that level a little bit. But when it comes to the dog man, I just think that those things seem to be pretty evil. Outside the one experience that I had the lady on my show, and she said that she saw it when she was a girl, and it was like it took like it was a young dog man, she said, and I don't want to say it became like they had a relationship, but it was like it took to her. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was a young dog man, she says, that took to her. And I don't give the story justice. I mean, that's been like 2 years ago that I've heard that story now. So, but it always sticks out in my head because that's the only time I've ever heard of somebody having a dog man experience that was like, kind of fluffy. So, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on winged humanoids such as Mothman, things of that nature? Do you think that's also a demonic entity?
Not all of them. Not all of them. I think like you have like the Thunderbird. That's something that I think could be very much real. And when people are talking about seeing the Thunderbird, it seems like they're seeing a prehistoric type of animal. What I find interesting with that is that I would love for somebody to come out and say that they had a sighting, but it wasn't flying, because we hear of we see video of these things and they're flying through the sky, and it's like, well, you just. It's one thing to see something flying in the sky because you're not close to it. You don't know. Maybe there's a mistaken identity, or maybe I don't know. But I would love for somebody to come out and say that they saw a Thunderbird or something like that, where it was on the ground, like in its nest that was 15 feet wide, like something like that. But so those things I don't think are anything other than probably just relic something. I don't know. I hate to say the word dinosaur because if anybody hasn't turned me off yet, they'd probably turn me off at that point. But but then there's things like the Mothman. The Mothman, it doesn't. Everything about it doesn't seem natural to me. Whether it's demonic or interdimensional, I've heard so many different theories on this thing. Like, I mean, anywhere from the demonic to interdimensional, time traveler, a being that can travel in between dimensions. But one thing that I always think is interesting is that we have things that overlay with different topics and categories. So you hear a lot with the dog man that they have these glowing red eyes. You hear that with demons. You hear that with the Mothman. Sometimes you hear that with Bigfoot. And so when that's what I kind of like really get interested in, is when I start hearing people's stories and they have that certain parts of their stories have characteristics of something else that I've heard before on something totally different. And that's, like with the Mothman, it just seems like it has a little bit of everything, yet at the same time that has a little bit of everything, it's also very well documented. And it's just one of those things where I think it's real. I think it really did happen. I think that there are other sightings that have happened, like out in Chicago in more modern recent times. But what it is, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if it was some kind of interdimensional being, though, whether you want to say that's a demonic being or, something else. But like I forget what scientist it was. She was on or he was on a Chelsea Handler show, I think it was. And he had said that, we do operate in parallel universes. And, if we as human beings, as somebody who's, an official person within I think he was the U.S., he had something to do within our government. If he's willing to state that and admit that in public, that we as human beings operate in parallel universes, then that means that parallel universes are real. Who's to say what's on the other side? And who's to say if there's something else on the other side, what kind of abilities it has is to come into this universe or this parallel universe. And so this dimension, I'm trying to say, it opens up this whole other realm of possibility of what's out there. And it just, that's what I meant like earlier in the show when I said that I really enjoy thinking about just things and what if kind of thing, because it kind of takes you down these rabbit holes of, what's possible. But yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question.
No, yeah, perfect. And when we explore things that are on the other side, let's talk about spirits and ghosts. What are your thoughts on, say, haunted locations where they have spiritual manifestations, whatever it is? Do you think it's actual conscious entities that are in a different realm, or do you think it's some sort of manifestation of a past event or like a time loop, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, I think that what you just said, a combination of both is very much what I think. You hear people of the leftover energy, the remnant energy, the energy that, kind of leaves its imprint, like almost like a carbon copy, and it just kind of goes on a loop. And that's what people are seeing. And I think that there really could be, credit to that. I really do. I think, but I think to say it's all that, I don't know about that, because there's so much detail. I mean, one great thing about living in the time that we live in, outside of the coronavirus, is that I had to bring it up once, right? But one great thing about living in the time that we live is that we have so much access to information so quickly. And so we really truly can think on a different level than people have in the past. And so when it comes to this idea of what these things are, there's too much documented evidence that shows that these things move around, they follow people, they haunt specific people, to say that it's just leftover energy. It does seem like there's a consciousness behind some of this with intent. One minor thing would be with me personally. I had a situation happen where my wife, I would say within the last year, she texted me. It was late one night and I was doing an interview, and she texted me and she just says, I just want to let you know that I saw a red light in our bedroom. It flashed on next to the TV and then shot off and left a light trail. And I'm like, I get the text while I'm in the middle of an interview. I'm like, well, good luck, dear. I'm talking to somebody, like, what am I going to do about it? It's gone now. Good luck. Close your eyes. You won't see it anymore. So, but I didn't think much of it. And she told me about it the next day, and I was like, okay, well, that's weird. And then probably a few months later, I'm going to bed late one night, and my son's actually in the bed with us. And so I'm trying to get situated where he's laying in the middle, and I pull the covers up, and they're kind of like piled up on my hip, so I couldn't really see much past my hip. And so somewhere between the pile of covers and my eyeballs, I see a red light appear, and it shot off and left a light trail. And I was like, whoa, okay, so that's what she was talking about. And in that same moment, it hits me that I saw that before. Before we bought this house, we lived in another town in an apartment. And in that apartment, I would sit in my living room, and I would see out of the corner of my eye, like shadows and stuff. And a lot of people say they see shadows out of the corner of their eye. But I could be sitting in my living room, like looking at the TV, and off to the corner, off to the side of the room was a hallway. And in that hallway was pictures on the wall. And I would see this shadow figure walking from like the bedroom to the bathroom to the bedroom down the hallway. And sometimes my wife would be back there, but sometimes she wouldn't be back there. And it's just very consistent. And I'd be sitting down, I'd be looking in the hallway, just staring like, please, I want to see this, nothing. And so I really got this feeling that something was going on though. So I took a video at one night when we were sleeping. I just set up her laptop because that's all I had. I set it to record video, and it recorded video all night long. I got up the next day and I looked at the video. Within the first 10 seconds, I see at the bottom of my bed at my feet, a red light just flash on and then flash off. And I was like, that's when I was like, I've seen this before, but it wasn't at my house. It was somewhere else. Does that mean that something has followed me to my house? I don't know. But then you have stories where like people, like I had this one lady on my show, and she was basically haunted her entire life by this entity. And whenever she talks about it, it gets aggressive. And so I'm thinking to myself, great, I'm talking to you about it now. Let's see what happens. And so she'll talk about how, like, when she talks about it, like it starts opening doors and closing doors, slamming things. But just as she said that on the interview, like literally just as she said, whenever I talk about it, it doesn't like it, it gets violent or whatever. I'm sitting in my office. And at that time, I even had a bigger beard than I have now. I used to, before I started podcasting, I was doing product reviews for beard companies. And I had a stack of boxes against my wall of product that I just too much. And it's probably like 20 boxes. And they've been sitting there for months and nothing. As soon as she says that, the whole stack comes flying down. And I was just like, I jumped. I was like, what the heck? And so I don't usually do video with my interviews, but back then I did it more than I do now. And I was on video with her. And so like, I just kind of looked real quick and I looked back and I just acted like nothing happened. I didn't want to, because I was like, I don't know if this is going to ruin the interview. I didn't know. I was like, it was probably like my first like 15 interviews I've ever done. Like, I mean, I was so new. I had no idea what I was doing. So I didn't want to react to it. I just let it go. And so that was a case where if it could have been a coincidence, but if it was something related to what we were talking about, like that was an entity that was supposedly with her that was here. And there's just other stories like that we hear. There's another woman who I interviewed for my Halloween show last year. One of the most terrifying stories I've ever heard in my entire life. She was haunted her entire life. This thing would interact with her, and it got to the point where the one time she heard some things or whatever. But long story short, she actually wound up getting drug out of her bed and down the hallway. And she was flipped over onto her back, and she sees in the ceiling, this thing is like in the corner of the ceiling staring at her. She calls her husband. He has to come home. He was working nights. She went to the bathroom in her pants, everything. Like she was scared to death. She's crying when I'm interviewing her. She started crying a little bit. And then this entity seems like it's now bothering her son. And so like her son is starting to draw things at school that are very reminiscent to what she experienced. And so like I forget some of the details, but like one of the things was there was like a message that her son wrote on one of his school projects, and it didn't make any sense. And when she asked him about it, he's like, the whatever told me, that's how I know that. And it was just like, so for her, she has seen now that something has been now starting to transfer into her son's life. And it seems like a generational thing. And so that all that said, there definitely seems to be on some level, there's a consciousness here where people are experiencing things that are straight out of horror movies. And, so yeah, I think it's a little bit of both.
Now, when we talk about some of these negative entities that affect people, I think when you say demonic, I think there's a much larger scope of entities than that could be just demonic. My personal thoughts are even human souls can become disincarnate and evil entities. But what are your thoughts on when it comes to those, I guess you could say, lower vibrational entities, demons, things like that? When it comes to their interaction with our world, it seems like, especially when it comes to possession, um, a lot of people who have problems at their home, drug problems, or problems spiritually, whatever, you hear them tell stories about how they have spiritual attachments, or they go to somewhere where they even have to perform an exorcism on someone. What are your thoughts on the demonic realm? And can we just lump all this into one category, or is it like I think like these different types of these entities?
Yeah, I don't think that we can lump it all into one category. I mean, it's very easy to do that. I mean, I think I don't know about you and stuff, but I mean, for me growing up and stuff, growing up from a lineage of Christian environment, you're just told that, there's demons, angels, and God, like happy three categories, that's it. And so when it comes to like, hauntings, like a ghost, if you get somebody on that's a Christian saying that, sure, you saw a ghost, the next answer is it was a demon. It wasn't really Grandpa George, right? And so everything's a demon. I don't think that that's the case. I think that, again, looking at just like this is the thing that kind of gets me, is that, like, people who want to say that, well, I don't believe that there are such things as ghosts, either there's heaven or hell, and Grandpa George can't haunt us here, kind of thing. Like, all you got to do is actually read the book you say you read. I mean, like, it's in there. And so, for one, you have the classic story of Jesus walking on water. That's a great place to start at, because when they were in the boat, I think it was Peter said, it's a ghost. Like, they believed it was a ghost, not Jesus. And so right there, I'm like, okay, so clearly the dudes who followed Jesus around believed that ghosts were real. And then you look at, like, King Saul. He outlawed sorcery, witchcraft. And his prophet Samuel died, and he needed answers. He wasn't hearing from God, so he went to the witch of Endor to summon the dead spirit of Samuel. And in that story, like, I'm telling you, man, like, Christians are like, well, it was a demon. It was a demon. How's that possible? It was a demon. Listen, I don't know how it's possible. All I know is that the Bible doesn't say one time that it was a demon. It doesn't refer that it was a demon. It says that he had a conversation with the dead spirit of Samuel. So you can put the definition on there if you want to make yourself feel good, but it doesn't say that in there. And then you have, like, Psalms 82, chapter 82, Psalms 82. The very first two verses in there, it describes God holding judgment amongst other gods. The word Elohim was holding judgment among the Elohim. And so it didn't say angels. It didn't say people. It said Elohim, which kind of says that God created not just angels, that, the general Christian term would be angels who then fell and became demons. But he has this whole hierarchy that he created that's not talked about in your traditional scriptures. But it does say it there in very plain terms. And so there's a lot of these different entities that come into play here. And I just can't get to the point where I would say that, yeah, it's all just demonic entities. Even like the demons themselves, like in the book of Enoch, it says that, like, there's fallen angels and then there's demons. They're not the same thing. And that demons, in the book of Enoch, it says that demons come from the dead spirits of the Nephilim. And so it's like, at least there it gives us a reason why we have these demonic encounters and stuff. I mean, in the book of Enoch, it describes it for us. But there's just a hierarchy here that I don't think we can even come close to understanding. I think it's fascinating. I absolutely think it's fascinating.
On the other hand, when we talk about angels, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that they are celestial or interdimensional beings? Some people think they're some sort of extraterrestrials. What are your thoughts on angels?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on angels are I would say, I guess, pretty traditional. I think that they're angelic beings that God created before He created man, and they're meant to serve humans, which is why a lot of them got pissed off. Then they decided to rock out because they're like, no, we're not down with that, you know. So, but angels are definitely interdimensional. To me, they're very real in the sense that my grandfather was on weekends, he did like evangelist stuff when he was alive. He was a washer, dryer, repairman during the week, and then on weekends he traveled all over the region. And he told me this one story of where, and this is a very common thing that I personally have heard from just different people and stuff. It's a very traditional idea of these things appearing. They were going to a town that they were not wanted. People didn't want them there, and they showed up anyways. And so they did their thing during the day. And there was a rumor going around that when they packed up shop at night and went back to their camps or whatever, some people were going to come and destroy the area. And so the men stayed up, and they were just kind of waiting around to see if these guys would show up to do anything, try to deter them. And sure enough, these guys showed up, and they came down this driveway. And as they were going down this driveway, it was like 2 or 3 cars. They stopped, and they just idled there, and then they backed out and left. And then they came back a few minutes later with more cars. And this happened like 2 or 3 times where they came back with more cars, and they came to a certain point, stopped, and then they would back out and leave. Nothing ever happened. And so the next day, some of the people go into town to get supplies like bread or whatever. And my grandfather said it must have been the talk of the town. He said that apparently that night, those guys came with every intention to destroy the area. But every time they came in, there was these tall, giant angels standing next to the stages where my grandfather and his guys were. And like my grandfather said, he never saw them, but apparently other people did. And that's a very common thing when it comes to these angels, is that people say that some people never saw them. Typically speaking, the people who are there guarding never saw them, but the person who was the offender did see them. Are they alien? They're definitely not from this world. I mean, in every sense of the word alien, I mean, they're not from here. They're interdimensional. They transcend dimensions. And so, in that sense, sure. But I think that they were created by a creator. And, so I think I'm more along the lines of the traditional sense of what the angels are.
Very cool. Now, I want to spend the last few minutes that we have talking about a subject that I've spent a lot of research on: UFOs, extraterrestrials, UAP, strange aerial phenomenon. First of all, have you ever seen or experienced a UFO or extraterrestrial experience?
Yes, I have. I actually have seen one of those. I actually saw twice, I can recall for sure. The very first time was when I was a kid. I saw with my mom. We were in the trailer park. It was late at night, and I was outside. I was probably taking the dog out or something like that. And looking across the street, like I said, there was a cornfield and a bunch of woods. And I saw this light. And what kind of was different about this light was that it wasn't just one light. It had a light above it, a light below, a light out to the left that was kind of far out. And it was moving sideways. And if you would think about how like a helicopter might have a light on the very back end of it and on the top and on the bottom, it's kind of the shape it was in. And then, but it was completely silent. And then it starts moving to the side, and it shoots out of, and this is, my mom was outside for this because I had already gotten her. It shoots out a beam of light down on the ground, like on an angle, like a 45-degree angle. And it's just hovering there. And then I'm like, holy crap. Like, I'm a kid freaking out. Like, I'm like, this is crazy. And my mom's watching, and then it starts coming in towards us. And so I run out to the road, and it comes in over us, like over the road, probably like 300-400 feet in the air. It was high up in the sky. It wasn't low. And it comes in over us, and then it kind of goes off up to the other direction. And it was completely silent. And for most of my life, I was like, I don't know if I really saw that, this, that, and the other. And it's just like 2 years ago, I was at my parents' house, and I mentioned it, and I was like, yeah, but that was probably nothing. And my mom was like, no. She's like, my mom was like, that was something different. And so she confirmed it with me. But what's really cool is this UFO sighting I saw, I want to say it's probably like a year or two ago. I drive tractor trailer for a living, and I'm driving my truck down the turnpike here in Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia, 276. I was right outside the Willow Grove exit. And actually, before I got to the Willow Grove exit, I'm approaching probably like 2 miles away from there. And I see this weird light in the sky. And it, it's the Philadelphia area. We got a lot of flight traffic, a lot of the Philadelphia airport, planes coming in and out. You see stuff in the sky. It's not normal. And so I didn't really think much of it until I realized that this thing wasn't moving, and I was gaining on it. So it wasn't like it was a star and it wasn't moving. Like, I was actually getting closer to this. It wasn't moving. And so I'm like interested. And I had probably like a few minutes to like watch this and think about it as I'm approaching. And I'm getting up on it. I'm getting up on it. I'm getting up on it. And I look out, and it's probably like 8 o'clock at night right now. It's dark out. And I look out my driver's side window as I pass this thing. It's probably like 200-300 feet off the ground. And as I pass this thing, I look up, and it's hovering there. And it's when I first described it, I said it was in the shape of a V. But then I had to check myself, and I said, no, it wasn't in the shape of a V. It was literally in the shape of a check mark. Like, one side was longer than the other, as far as if you want to call it a wing or whatever, but it was hovering there, and like it was in the shape of a check mark. It was like one side was longer than the other. And I saw that thing like 2 or 3 times. And the very first time I saw it in very good detail is the best I saw it. The other ones, I could tell what it was. I knew what it was, but it was kind of like in a different position where I couldn't see real good while I was driving. And I told this on my show a couple of times. And what's really interesting is just this past weekend, I interviewed a guy who he was a truck driver as well. And he came on to talk about his experience where he was actually contracted to drive materials into an underground military base here in Pennsylvania, and to kind of talk to us about what he saw there, which is awesome. But then he said that he had other experiences he wanted to tell me, and one of the experiences was he got fired from that trucking company that delivered to grocery chain, and he came out to my area. And he was sitting outside of a giant grocery store right outside of Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. And he said that he was sitting there at 4:30 in the morning, and he saw a check mark shaped UFO flying over him. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, yes, I'm telling you this because I want to validate what you saw, because I saw the same thing. And where he saw it, it was maybe 2 to 5 miles away from where I saw it. And what's interesting is 2 miles west of where he saw it is the Horsham Air Force Base, which is supposed to be inactive. I've done several deliveries there, at least 2 or 3 deliveries there. And the very first time I was there, I was with a different company, and I was much younger. I was probably in my early 20s. And I asked them, you guys shutting down? They said, yeah, we're shutting down the base. Is very limited, access, all that stuff. And then since then, I've been with another company where I've delivered to them. And it seems like they're pretty functional there, but they're not doing anything. Like, it's just, I don't know what's going on there, but it's really interesting that I saw that 2 or 3 times, and this guy saw it once, and in the vicinity of this supposed shut down Air Force base. So I was just like, I don't know, but yeah, I've seen UFOs. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that is pretty cool. Now, I've never seen what I can verify as a UFO. I've had plenty of friends and people that I know that have. But as far as the phenomenon, I know that a lot of it is most likely us, our military, black projects that we don't know about.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on the overall phenomenon? Do you think that we have travelers coming visit us from different galaxies, or do you think it's more of an interdimensional phenomenon or something completely different?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it's possible. I think to say that we're the only living beings in the universe, just on the very human, take my theological faith out of it, like all that stuff, just the basis of it. Like, it's like, really? I mean, the universe is really big, and so it's like, could we really be the only things that live in this thing? So I think that there definitely could be some type of visitors. You also have to think about, like, so you have to think about, like, how light years work, right? And so the idea of how long does it take for light to reach Earth, right? We're talking about, if you see a star that's what, 7 million light years away, that's a really far distance, right? And it finally gets to us, and they say that by the time we see the light, the star is gone. And so how far out are these beings to be traveling to us? And is it possible for them to make it here in their lifetime? Well, on a very physical, natural sense, probably not. And so that's when you start thinking about the interdimensional traveling, bending time. Do they have an ability to manipulate time that we don't have? And so I think it's possible on that sense, where they surely cannot travel in the same sense that we travel in order for them to be here. Unless they were always here, right? I mean, you hear people talk about how they were here before us, So, I don't know, but I definitely think that these things probably have abilities that are interdimensional, in the sense that, whether it's interdimensional or time-wise, like able to actually truly manipulate time so that, they can travel far greater distances than, we could normally do. There's been interesting things that have happened in the past few years. And I'm drawing a blank as to Ultima Thule is, I think, what the asteroid was called. I think it was called Ultima Thule. And it came within our range of being able to detect it. But what was interesting about this was the thing slowed down. Like, it actually slowed down, and I think it actually sped up then. And so, like, there was that doesn't seem very possible in outer space. Okay.
Oh, you're talking about the Oumuamua or something like that. The one that was interdimensional, and it kind of rocketed past and slowed down at some point and then made a turn.
Yeah. And there was one before that we detected radio waves off of, like we got radio signals from it. And I think the one I'm talking about, I'm pretty sure it was called Ultima Thule. And the shape of it was interesting as well, because it was like two round rocks that were, like, kind of pushed together. And if you're thinking sci-fi wise, and taking for the fact that this thing has slowed down and then sped up, it looks like it could have been two separate crafts that were docking together. That's what it looked like. It looked like it, or it could have been. It could have been that, or it could have been something like maybe an out of service something, because it looked like a rock, right? So maybe it was a really old out of service kind of thing, or maybe that's just how it looks. I don't know. But one thing's for sure is it was very interesting of how it worked out there, and it just outside of that, I don't know if I've ever heard of anything slowing down in space and then speeding up. Like, that doesn't make sense unless it has its own energy.
Yeah, and as far as the contact experience itself, when we hear of people actually being taken on ships, whether physically or some people reported in their dreams they're taken, what are your thoughts on the abduction experience? Any thoughts on what may be going there, a bigger picture, anything like that?
I'm fascinated by the abduction experiences. I really am. I mean, obviously, if I was going through it, I wouldn't be fascinated by it. But it's very interesting to hear some of these people's stories, and the complexity of it. This bag goes deep. Like, this isn't just like for instance, the Travis Walton experience that he had. Like that experience is very shallow compared to a lot of people's accounts of what they've been through. Like Travis, I mean, I'm not trying to take anything away from him. Like his experience is a classic one, and it's one of the best stories that we've had. But he was abducted. He saw things there. He was brought back. Like he's not going to tell you that he was put into a 20 and back. He's not going to tell you that he was put in a secret space program and forced labor for 20 years to be brought back in time. But there are a lot of people out there that are having these memories come back to them, that are cooperating with other people in the world. And when they see each other, it's like they knew each other from somewhere else. It's very trippy the more you look into this. And then the idea of supposed aliens working alongside of some kind of secret space program, on the dark side of the moon. I definitely think that I think that this is another layered situation where I think that sometimes when we have somebody who was experiencing an abduction, it could be something less alien and more on the demonic level. But I do not think that that's the case for every single one. I had several people on my show have described this experience where the one guy he was describing, he said he woke up, his wife's laying next to him. There's these two gray entities at the bottom of his bed. They start pulling him off the bed, but he said at the same time that they were pulling him off the bed, he also felt like something was being pulled out of him, like his spirit or his soul was being pulled out of him. And like that, when somebody says that, it puts this whole experience on a very spiritual level. And this isn't just them taking my body and probing me in a ship somewhere. Like this is like something else, and so you hear that, but then you also hear people having these experiences where they're abducted, they're implanted. I've had several people send me pictures of supposed implants in their body. And, it's these x-rays and like the one was, I think is in his knee, and it was like this floating thing in there. And what I find interesting is that the one guy, he said that he didn't want it out. I'm like, you don't want it out? And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, what are the odds? I said, do you think that when you die, if they try to extract it, do you think it will still be there? And he's like, I doubt it. And I was like, well, just get it out. Like, but what's interesting is that these things tend to move in the body too. Like you hear about people trying to have them extracted and they go to get them out and it's gone. It's not there. And then as soon as they stop trying to take it out, it's there again. It's like, what is that? So, oh man, I totally am blanking on what you actually asked me, but I just started.
I was asking about the contact phenomenon itself, and I was also going to ask if you've heard of any accounts of people, because I've heard of plenty of accounts of people having experience where they'll meet like hybrid children or be involved in some kind of DNA or fertilization experiments or something along those lines. Have you had plenty of those experiences?
I haven't had a lot of those experiences. I know what you're talking about. I'm familiar with that. But I haven't had it. It makes sense to me though. Like the whole idea of the abduction thing, and especially the sexual encounters that people seem to have with these abductions. It makes sense that, like, I don't think we got just perverted aliens out there that are trying to just abduct people and have their way with them and put them back. Like, all right, let's go to the neighbor's house tomorrow night, guys. Like, it's just, I don't think that's the way this works. And I think that there's another purpose there. And so like you talk to different crowds and every crowd has their own definition as to why it's happening. But one thing is for sure that seems to be for sure to me is that there's an actual agenda there. And I think it's very possible that we're talking about hybrid humans in some parts of the world. I think that we're dealing with people who are actually a result of abduction, human alien hybrid production. Whether they know it or not, I don't know. But the guy that I just talked to this past weekend, the truck driver that was going to the underground military base, he did this for 4 years straight. And the one guy that he had frequent interaction while he was there. He didn't do a whole lot there. He backed the truck in, and for 8 hours, he'd just sit there and wait for them to be done. And then he'd drive the truck out. That's all he did. He wasn't allowed to go at places. He said it went down 5 levels. He was only on level 2, free food. But this guy named Thom, Thom, he always had interactions with. He's like a 6'8" guy. He always had a bottle of water with him that was never opened. And the one time he came into work, because he was not allowed to call out sick. Like this run that he had to be there. It was no excuses. So he comes in sick, and Thom finds out that he's sick and gives him what Thom said was chicken broth. And he said he drank this chicken broth, and he said it was the most strong, powerful chicken broth he's ever tasted in his entire life. And he said it knocked him out cold. Like he slept for like 4 or 5 hours. And he said after he woke up, he couldn't go back to sleep for, I think he said 3 or 4 days. He was up straight. Like he just couldn't sleep. Like he wasn't tired. It wasn't even like he was trying to sleep. Like he wasn't tired. And I said to him, it doesn't sound like that was chicken broth, bro. Like that sounds like it had like artificial flavoring to make it taste like chicken broth. But he was at, I think, his son's wrestling match, and he looks across the room, and there's Thom standing there by himself. He wasn't with a family. He wasn't with his kid or anything like that. And he looks at Thom, and Thom looks at him, and then does like a double take and looks back at him. And when Thom does that double take and looks back at him, like he said, his face literally was different. Like he said, he said for all intents and purposes, he looked like a lizard person. And he said he never saw Thom like that before. It was just at one time, and it was in public. His wife saw it. Then they leave. His wife didn't see that. His wife saw a glaring stare that this guy gave him, but she didn't see that what he saw. They're driving back. They're probably like an hour away from where they were, and he starts telling his wife about Thom and where he knows him from. And he goes into the underground base. The next time he goes in, he sees Thom, and Thom rips into him, says, "Don't you ever acknowledge me in public again, this, that, and the other." And he said, "Don't you ever talk about me to your wife again either." And he's like, how do you know that? And so Thom, to me, like from the outside looking in, I'm like, was Thom one of those hybrid people? Because he looked like a human, but apparently had other abilities as well. And he was working that underground military base in Pennsylvania. And I'm fascinated by it. Like that location, it's called Raven Rock. I am fascinated by it. It's right outside of Gettysburg. And I can't go there because I'll get arrested, but man, I would love to go there.
Yeah, man, that's fascinating. I could spend all night talking about this stuff with you, but Tony, thank you so much. You have such a fascinating perspective on this. Before you head out tonight, let everyone know where they can find the Confessionals podcast, any social media, websites, anything like that.
Yeah, so my show is the Confessionals podcast, and I interview people on their personal experiences. So it's paranormal. It's also conspiracy. We just pretty much hit on anything that's off the beaten path, and I don't play, the judge and jury of anything. I have people come on the show. They share their experiences. We have a long form conversation about it. And it's me just gathering information. That's how I do it. Like I hold conversations with people, and, it's an entertaining thing for the audience, and it's also educational. So the Confessionals podcast, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, anywhere really, anywhere you can find podcasts. And also the confessionalspodcast.com. We upload all the shows there. There's a blog there, all that fun stuff. But yeah, that's where people can find me.
Awesome. Tony, thank you so much. There's so much more we can talk about. I will definitely have you back on in the future.
All right. Sounds good, brother.
You have an excellent night.
You too.